Hi, my name is Mikey. This is Tyler. We're the founder of Innovative Start Organization, a nonprofit that teaches financial literacy. And with these videos, we are going to inform, not persuade, on some financial topics and economic factors. So previously, we've talked about, certain things as far as like unemployment and things in those regards, as far as like Fed interest rates, a lot of things that play parts around the bigger picture. Tyler and I wanted to revisit as one of the first things that we talked about a while back, and we mentioned in the last video is, job reports and what that looks like for some of the unemployment numbers and how that kind of like translates. So we're gonna try to simplify it and have an open discussion about some of those pieces. But yeah, before we get into it, please leave a comment below as far as like some things that you've seen within job reports or just, applying to jobs as a whole. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So recently it just came out, according to BLS.gov. If you've not aware of BLS, they're the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. But essentially, it's a government website that has all the job reporting data. And what happened is that the amount of open jobs or jobs that are available is lower than the unemployment number. Now, with that being said, a lot of times people look at unemployment as like, oh, it's only, 4%, 5%, or sometimes up to 11%. And as a percentage, it does not look a lot, but that's millions, right? We're talking about millions, right? Now, if I told you, oh, it's only, 10% of your paycheck or whatever, and you're making millions of dollars, you're gonna be like, ah, that's not a lot. It's like $100,000 on your check. So like, it's significant in like the grand scheme of the picture of it. So uh, yeah, realistically too, Tyler and I were also discussing is just how many available jobs were just reported. So Tyler, I'm gonna pass it over to you to kind of rock that, and I'm gonna pick up after you as far as that goes.
Yeah, let me just make sure I pull up these numbers we were talking about. Um, okay, where is it at here? Yeah, so th this is crazy for August 2025. Um, it says in the Wall Street Journal, U.S. companies announced just 1,494 new jobs in August, which is crazy. So this is the lowest for the month since 2009. Now again, there's a lot, some of this is clickbaity, so we got to, break it down a little bit. Like this is for the month of August. Um, and also just keep in mind that no, this is, I think, didn't we speak about this on a previous podcast or
Hmm.
maybe this was with us personally, but a lot of these numbers have been moving. They go back and they revise the numbers, unfortunately. So it's just it's just so hard. And it doesn't help that the Fed bases some of their rate decisions off of these numbers that constantly fluctuate and change, which doesn't help them either, which, um, what is it called? Employment is one of the biggest factors,
Hmm.
deciding factors for, rate decisions and things like that. Um, there's another one real quick. Hold on, it's pulling up.
While you're pulling it up, I'm gonna butt in just real quick. So essentially,
Yeah, go
what we're
ahead, go
looking
ahead.
at is the Fed's main job is to, make sure there isn't any recessions happening. And in a recession, we already explained that in the last video. Um, but essentially, right, we the economy as a whole works best when consumers have money to spend and we have a growing GDP. Um, and with that GDP, I think I also saw that it was only like let me see here. My piece here. GDP was grew at an annualized rate of 3.3% in the second quarter of 2025. So, and that is followed by a contraction of 0.5% in the first quarter. So, what we're looking at is like a slight fluctuation as far as that goes. Now, in reality and like the big scheme of it too is that unemployment plays a big factor, right? If people are unemployed, that means they're not having enough money to spend, and therefore that affects GDP. So yada yada. Like so, you see how these things just trickle down. And essentially, the big issue is that people are not able to afford to live, right? Because either jobs are not paying enough or they don't have a job, right? and then you say, well, Mikey, there's, 300, 400 million, US citizens, and then how many of those are adults working, yada yada. And then for that percentage, that's only, a few million people. But essentially, like, again, like I said, like a few million is a lot as far as it goes, right? And that few million is just unemployed. We're not talking about people who are not getting paid enough to actually live, you know, at least a comfortable or a decent lifestyle in order to afford those things and to spend money. One of the biggest factors is if you are, at a poverty line or lower middle class or lower class or whatever it is within that, um, you are essentially always spending more money than somebody who does have that or is on the other side of that range, right? Uh, they're saying it costs to be poor. Essentially, when you have all these factors that play into it and, economic factors, right? It's harder to climb out of that essentially when you're looking at those numbers and statistics. So um, it's going to be interesting because I think announcements for Fed interest rates are coming up soon, right? I know they did some other stuff, but I know they have like another discussion or whatever before they probably finalize some of those talks. But um, most likely, right, they're going to try to not cause, I guess, any chaos with their announcement, and that's usually why things are held steady. If you see like large cuts or whatever, there's probably something bigger as a factor playing into that. But yes, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Tyler. Though, just sorry about the interruption.
No, no, I mean that's good. It's a lot, and there's also, you know, it's kind of weird how they're called, but again, through this financial literacy journey everyone's on doing their own thing, there's like non-farm payroll jobs, like all of these different wordings, and so don't let that overwhelm you or sometimes I'll like underestimate myself, like how do I not know that or whatever. Just look it up, Google, and some of this stuff sounds more complicated than it actually is. So
Hmm.
just want to put that out there. Um, One thing I will say, as you know, we don't want to get too political on the podcast, but the reality is Trump, I think he just hired on a new uh, labor person for the that's running the labor statistics. Let me just make sure real quick. I don't
Yeah,
want
I
to
also
say
heard
this.
about that announcement too. But um,
Yeah, new labor secretary.
which is also interesting because the discourse around that, right, is that the previous person that was on it was fired, weren't they, or did they resign?
Yeah, I'm pretty. I thought that there was a bunch of drama around it.
Yeah, there's
Let
a
go.
I remember there was a bunch of stuff around it, but essentially, the numbers being reported were not up to the standard that they were looking for, and so the biggest issue with that is that they feel like they, or at least like people that discuss it, and again, we're not trying to be political about that, is that there could be bias around the numbers being reported. As Tyler was saying earlier, and as far as like what we're trying to look at, as far as like, when they make these announcements about the BLS statistics. So essentially, if, you know, your person that you have in charge of that is in charge of getting that data and then, reporting those numbers, and during your tenure as the president or whatever else for your political party, whatever in that case, right? Those numbers reported also reflect back on you, as
They're all
in your
no,
control in the
each pol-
economy. So
each political party is going to want to look good, obviously, right?
yes. So again,
But doesn't make it okay.
doesn't make it okay. So in in a perfect world, right, regardless of political system or whatever it is, right, you want the direct answer. You don't want any, you know, wording that makes it seem like, it's this way or it's that. Again, like job report numbers will come out, they'd be like, oh yeah, 200,000 jobs have been added within this quarter, or whatever. And when you take a deeper look, they're not in an industry that's paying well, right? A real rewind back as far as like when we talked about this a long time ago. So last year around August this time, Tyler and I talked about some of the job reports for the quarter. It was around August. There was a 285 jobs added for that quarter, right? Which was crazy because this was really before we saw um, just the job market look as scarce as it is now, right? And another thing I was mentioning with Tyler yesterday is that, it's hard to see because, people have their own bias. If you have a job and, you see somebody get hired here, you see somebody get hired there, you're like, there's no way, right? If you're not seeing it yourself, right? Maybe everybody around you has some type of job or whatever, and you're like, I don't really see how that's the case. On the other hand, you can be on the other side of that spectrum where you just sit here and you see thousands of people just like you trying to apply to a job and get something, and it's been without any type of win. Up to a year and a half. I've seen people been looking since, early 2024. So it's it's crazy because when you don't understand some of those statistics and the large scope of it, um, you have to really look at it because there's always going to be discourse on how much people should be paid, yada yada. Like people like to do whataboutisms, right? So when we look at, right, what does it mean to be paid? If somebody works full time at any establishment or whatever else, right, that should be paid a living wage. We don't need whataboutisms about a teenager or working part time or whatever else. That has nothing to do with anything, right? For a full time person, right? Just they have a family too or whatever circumstances that allow them to, go get an education, work in a corporate setting, does not matter. But that's always the issue and that's always the argument. Or when it comes to going to school, oh, you did the 4 years, you took on the loans or whatever for something else. It depends on how your school system worked. If you were going throughout school and they said education was only the next step and they didn't offer you any other choices or things, you have a narrow scope on what are possibilities that you can do outside of that unless somebody communicates that to you or unless you do that external learning yourself. So it's no fingers being pointed, no whataboutisms. We need to just, look at it as a whole, as a big picture. So again, what I was saying, as far as like the number of jobs reported, now that was just for that instance. It doesn't really say for the whole year. I think for the whole year it was around like, I think did it show in that statistics what the whole year was for? I think I saw in there too.
No, there's been a bunch of job. One of the other links I sent you was a bunch of job revisions, but um, I said the job revisions were over like 800,000 for year to date. So something. Let me pull that back up real quick. We got so many messages going on here. Um,
But I do think, right, if we're looking at the bigger picture in those job reports, um,
all right, job cuts, $800,000, or 800,000 job cuts year to date.
and when those numbers get revised, right, because obviously for the Fed to make decisions on what they're going to do with the interest rates, that's like the more extreme part. And then whatever the Fed does with the interest rates does a whole lot of things. I think some other factors that we've looked at it, right, is tariffs and other things and such. Um, there's again, it seems complicated. I think for the everyday person, especially if you're not in like a finance setting, if you're not a finance bro or whatever, I just think that just take a look, you know, Google it, say, hey, what does this mean? Take it like, word by word, essentially, to really understand it. I think if you really grasp what it means to what those factors mean, you'll get a generalized idea of like, okay, like these are some things you should look out for to better prepare yourself in your financial future, essentially.
In any of these scenarios, what we highly recommend, still living below your means, um, working as hard as you can for a certain period of your life. You can't work 24/7 your whole life, and that's not the goal, obviously. But there may be some periods, at least in my own life, where you've had to work harder, or I've had to work harder, work longer hours to get somewhere, and it's, paid off and discipline, things like that. But, you know, just like you said, some of these things, some of these scenarios, you gotta stay grounded. Is like, hey, if you don't need to take out extra student loans, or they'll let you take out the full student loans. If you don't need the full student loans, don't do it. Like, don't try to live off that money just in college because you're gonna have to pay for it in the
Hmm.
future. It is tempting. It's the same thing with credit cards and things like that. So this is all playing into that. But this is where working hard wherever you're at, whether it's restaurant or whether it's a corporate job, whatever, those things will add up. Networking, connecting with others, my opinion, discipline over time, consistent acts
Hmm.
will build up and help. So I don't know, just some encouragement. I feel like it's a lot of doom and gloom with some of this right now,
Right.
but
Um, and to also add on to that, right? If my establishment's main line of business is getting people to take on debt, obviously I don't care how much of that debt you take on. I'm not gonna tell you, oh, take the minimum amount because what I'm looking to do is to get my money back plus interest. So, and whatever reason you think, oh, well, they offered it to me, so obviously I need it in that sense, is not the case. They want you to take out that amount because they're hoping to make more off the back end. And then to also piggyback off of this, something that I talked about with Tyler earlier is that the debt service Klarna, however you say it, is getting ready to IPO. Now, we've also talked about this in a previous video, essentially, discussing that these buy now, pay later businesses are interesting because they just rack up debt because a lot of people are not paying it back, right? So at any time that you IPO is because you need some type of extra cash or whatever, right? It was already announced that they were taking on a lot of debt that they were not seeing any type of profit. Um, when you, which is also interesting too, because if somebody doesn't have money and you're loaning them something, right? The expectation that they'll pay that back is considerably low, right? Regardless if they're a good what is it credit or whatever it is, if you think that that person's reliable or
credit
not,
worthy.
yeah, if they're
Yeah.
credit worthy. So in any sense, like if they are good or if they aren't, right? You don't really know that. They'll do like a check on you, right? But it's at the same time, it's not like they're gonna say no. They're just gonna change the interest rates, right? So 9 times out of 10, you're gonna take that and you're like, ah, yeah, I'll do this and this, and then if you don't pay them back, or a lot of people that don't pay them back, or they're doing buy now, pay laters on small items or whatever it is, and like, oh, where's my money going? Because it's taken out of their account or whatnot. I just think it's just crazy because now that they're gonna IPO, it's gonna be extremely interesting, right? I don't know how their stock price is gonna fluctuate or change because I think any person that looks at their financials is going to be interested to see, how they're carrying debt and how they're leveraging their own debt in order to create some type of profit. Because again, they're relying on interest rates, right? But if people are not paying them back, those interest rates don't matter. So they basically bought something for you, and they're waiting for you to get them something plus something else, right? But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think either they will be doing that soon, sometime this, probably tomorrow, next week. I just know I just saw some news about it. So I would also take a look into that. It could completely change the landscape goes. That'll also be an indicator as well. Not only can you look at just overall things as far as like spending habits, but a business like that can give you a lot of information about a lot of people. So I'm sure the data collection that they have is probably what's giving them a good significant amount of money. So that's something that you can look into is just as far as like, oh, they're collecting certain data around creditworthiness for certain individuals, right? Because they can sell that off within their terms or conditions and you're not reading those probably. So um, as a everyday consumer, it's good to just pay attention to the small things always, and never take on debt that you don't have to. Some things can wait. Sometimes it takes longer for things to get into that. I think a lot of times people either have like a FOMO or they need things instantly or instant, gratification as far as that goes. You just have to. You sometimes gotta be patient. That's all. Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see once we get towards the end of the year. Um, how these numbers play out. I'm sure Tyler and I will talk about it again in a future video. So just look back onto this conversation and just see how those things played out because obviously things will change as we get into that I guess time of the year. Um, what I've heard other people say, which is never really based on anything, is they're like, oh, it's getting to the end of the year, they need to file, they'll hire more people or whatever so they can get things going. What's even crazier than the accounting world is that after busy season is when you see the most amount of layoffs. So they'll use you bone dry during their peak, and then they'll be like, okay, now we're gonna let you go. So extremely, extremely interesting. AI is another factor. We've also talked about that. There's a lot of other things that are going to come in and change and shape the corporate world. So please keep your eye on those things. We're probably gonna talk about those in future videos. But yeah, Tyler, anything from you before we wrap up?
No, so one thing we're looking at in the future, in 2 weeks, the Fed will decide if they're going to cut rates again. So we'll definitely do a video on that. And I think it's just something, as there's a lot of talk with these interest rate cuts. For me, at least personally, it's real easily to like, oh, if this happens, then I can do this, or this will make the economy go up and down, or whatever. It's never guaranteed. Last year, the Fed cut rates a little bit, um, and thought mortgage rates were going to go down, and they ended up going up. So we just say you never know, and unfortunately. So
Yeah.
my caveat with some things coming down the pipeline here in the markets.
Yes. Pay attention to just, overall market movements too. Um, I think it's been just kind of hectic. Like I've yet to go into the stock market and see it, for a month time or whatever, like anywhere near like what the pandemic was. Now during the pandemic, that was like 2, 3 months of just straight plunge before it started bringing itself back out of that hole. This year it's really just been like up down, but I don't think it's really been any crazy growth. I'm looking forward to seeing what the S&P is because it has an average growth rate of about, I think, was it 10% every year. So when we look at those final numbers, what that looks like, along with some of the Fed interest rates for each quarter, and compare those to previous years, we'll really get a good scope on, how the economy moved for this year. I do feel like, and I'm sure this has been mentioned a lot, is that we're still recovering for pandemic times that did a lot of shaping to the economy. I wouldn't say damaging because maybe for some other people it doesn't feel that way. But those are just some things that you can really take a look at and be like, okay, let's start comparing some of these things. What are some factors that we can look at? Pandemic was only 4 years ago. To some people that might be a long time if you're on the younger end. For some other people that might be, a short time of span if you're on the older end. I just think overall we just need to just really pay attention to it. So again, to kind of wrap up on our discussion, one, just looking at some of those unemployment numbers, again, taking a look back at it, we'll probably discuss it again within that last quarter whenever they announce those. It's also going to be interesting with the newly appointed labor statistics person, how that looks compared to other numbers. Um, always do your own due diligence. Obviously, we talk about stuff, and sometimes we may say some things that could be potentially opinionated. So do your own research. That's what we always encourage. Again, we're never trying to persuade you on any of these economic or financial talks. So for those things that we do bring up, please, please, please do your own due diligence. But we appreciate if you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you would like in future videos, and if you have anything over the unemployment numbers and or what we mentioned at the end, these debtors who are IPOing. So yeah, just to wrap up on that, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you next time. See you.